Chapter 1. It was welcome home of the century me. But there was no greeting committee on hand as I swung down from the train at Glendale. Not unless you consider the two figures in dark top coats leaning very casually against a baggage truck. Beyond the station, the Los Feliz Hills, up where I had lived as a kid, showed a halo of Pacific Ocean sunset. I got a tight feeling in my stomach when I began to wonder how many of my old neighbors would remember me. All of them probably, because you find hardly anyone who doesn't read the papers these days, or at least listen to radio newscasts. No, they hadn't put me on television. That would come next time, because you see, there probably would be a next time. I was under no illusions. When I got a cab and headed for town, I glanced back. The two figures that had been by the baggage truck back there in the station yard were following me in a black sedan. Phooey for them, I thought. Of course, if I had wanted to make things easy for Hayes, I could have stayed on the train to the Union Station instead of getting off at Glendale. But then who wants to make things easy for Hayes? Pay him back with his own coin. If he ever had a kind thought about anyone, it had died of malnutrition. A lot of people had protested when Reg Dermott announced that Danny Gumbo would once again be putting his brains on a typewriter ribbon for the Globe. But not as the bright young sports columnist. No, this time I would be a menial. Doing obits, probably, or at least rewrite on the home and garden page. It took a lot of courage for Reg to fight the front office in my behalf and buck the pressure of guys like Hayes. Too bad, because I would probably undo his good work. At First and Main I paid off the cab in the glow of dirty neon that faced an ancient building. As I took off toward Central Station, the pair in the sedan cruised slowly behind me. Half a block up, I entered a whitewashed brick building. Inside a small office I came up flat against a counter. Above the desk was a sign, all ex-convicts must register within 24 hours after arrival in this city ORD #42348J. The young guy in a blue uniform behind the counter shoved a clipboard in front of him when I nodded at the sign. With pencil poised he said, "Name? Danny Gumbo. Where incarcerated?" "San Quentin," I supplied his waiting pencil. 3 years and 4 months served of a 15-year sentence for grand theft. The cop's eyes got a chill in them. "So you're the Danny Gumbo. Too bad they didn't give you life. You learned to control your temper around cops." Lieutenant Dave Hayes wedged himself into the office. His two bird dogs who had tailed me from Glendale Station were at his heels, young guys who might have come off the UCLA football squad. Some contrast to Hayes, he of the old school. "I expected you to get off at the LA station," Hayes said in a voice that always reminded me of auto wheels rumbling over a plank bridge. He rubbed the heel of his hand across the bridge of a nose that had been broken back in the old days when he tried to arrest a recalcitrant suspect. The suspect arrived at the station DOA, which means, dead on arrival. That's the kind of a guy Hayes was. Never lay your hands on him. Hayes swung the clipboard around on the counter and gave it a careful scrutiny, although he knew everything about me by heart. On his birth certificate it probably said that Hayes's eyes were brown, and that's about as close as you can get to describing two spots of rust in a pool of stagnant water. I said, I didn't want to take a chance on breaking any rules. That's why I came right down here. Because I know you're only waiting for the day you can send me back. That was said for the benefit of the 3 young cops in the room, just in case something happened to me before I had a chance to do the thing I had waited 3 years and 4 months to do, make Catherine talk. Although there was such a thing as departmental loyalty, most of the younger cops, and a lot of the old-timers, put Hayes in the same class with migraine. "You won't be bothered," Hayes said crisply, "as long as you obey the terms of your parole." That was so much pap, and he knew it. Right then he looked as big to me as one of those switch engines down on Alameda Street. When I stepped out into the hall, the 2 plainclothes men followed along behind Hayes as if he had them on strings. I looked at his face, brutality in every line of it. A throwback, definitely, because the rest of his family had at least a touch of aristocracy, the former Mrs. Danny Gumbo included. From a fine old pioneer family, would someday be one of the lines in his obit. He was prepared to protect the reputation in the community of that old family. How well I knew. He said, "One of the terms of your parole is that you're to keep away from your ex-wife." Color heated my cheeks. Catherine was Hayes' sister. I gave Hayes and his boys a 1/4-inch lift of a corner of my mouth and left them, my heart thudding loudly in my ears. When I left the station I was shaking because I knew there probably would be no one in the whole city who did not remember Danny Gumbo. Memories could be refreshed by going to any newspaper morgue where they could read it all in the headlines. Those first headlines told how sports reporter Gumbo had absconded with the charity funds and been sentenced to 15 years. Also in the morgue clips there were other headings. Catherine Gumbo divorces convict husband. And a little later, Catherine Gumbo marries. The story underneath told how Lieutenant David Hayes had been best man at the wedding of his sister. The whole thing about the charity fight had been my idea. I promoted it in my sports columns and got Paulie Dorgan and Tommy Dane, a pair of middleweights, signed for the go. The proceeds were to be used to rebuild the Eastlake Boys Club that had burned down. You can hit your mother-in-law over the head with an axe and you'll find a certain amount of sympathizers. But a guy who steals from kids, wow. See why everybody hated my innards? I couldn't help thinking of all those kids who had been deprived of a clubhouse all because of a beautiful thing like Catherine. The night of the fight I had all the dough for the tickets, and I got drunk. $32,000 in a black bag. The last person I saw before I passed out was Catherine. Good and lovely Catherine. Probably the main reason Reg Dermott had given me a job was that he felt contrary enough to get me out of San Quentin just because Hayes wanted to keep me there. The Globe didn't have as big a circulation as some of the other dailies, but it could raise more racket than all the rest of them put together. On Main Street a B-girl smiled at me from a tavern doorway. In the old days I wouldn't have given an eyelash to her kind. This night she looked good. She had long hair that came to the shoulders of a gray tweed jacket. It wasn't the overhead neon that made her hair red. No, it was real color. She looked more like Pasadena than Skid Row. This night I had more important things on my mind. I couldn't afford to violate my parole by swapping drinks with a redhead in a tweed jacket, no matter how much I might have wanted to. When she smiled, I shook my head, saying, "Not tonight, sister. Sorry." Her lovely face, and it was lovely all right, seemed to freeze. Right then I saw her green eyes shine angrily. I got out of there fast. I wanted no trouble with women. It was just in time that I remembered Foster's gym down the block. There was no use inviting trouble by passing the place. The glove and resin crowd would love to cut me up in small pieces. Once I had been their boy. But no more. Chapter 2. The Altamont Hotel was a familiar landmark and I was thankful the clerk, a sandy-haired man, was one I had never seen before. My name on the register didn't even rate a raised eyebrow from him. At the Altamont you had to go down a long dingy hall to the self-service elevator. It did not surprise me when I saw the cage was dark. The Altamont was noted for its lack of consideration for guests. The minute I stepped in with my key to 303, I felt something hard nudge my spine. The automatic doors closed as somebody in the shadows pushed the right button. The cage began to descend slowly to the basement. My throat got all cottony. When the doors opened I saw this guy in the wash of dirty yellow light from a street-level transom. His name was Burt Drake. His plaid suit and tie, speckled with horseshoes, smelled of the track. Burt Drake used to hang around Foster's gym. In one hand he held an automatic, in the other hand an envelope. He shoved the envelope at me. "Here's $5,000. Take it and get out of town." "I'm on parole," I said, edging around in the basement shadows thrown up by packing cases and stacked trunks. Sure, I had expected a few ripe tomatoes in my face, or perhaps a ride on a rail and some hot tar and goose feathers, if they still did those things. But this, it was like a scene from a Class C movie. "Who wants me out of town, Bert? The same guy who stole the money, the $32,000? When he waved the envelope under my nose again I started to lift my hands as if trying to explain with a gesture the impossibility of the situation. Suddenly I grabbed his gun hand. We wrestled across the concrete floor, Burt Drake cursing and trying to get the gun free, me trying to keep him from committing murder. I put a leg behind him. We fell hard. His shoes made scraping sounds on the floor as he frantically tried for leverage. His breath, violent with garlic and wine, beat against my face. A two-bit hoodlum, Drake knew all the tricks. He rolled me on my back. I thought, this is it. At that moment I saw the other guy. Just an impression of wavy hair and a fat face and horn-rimmed glasses in the darkness. Something bright and lethal pricked the shadows. Burt Drake shuddered and stuck to me like a moth on glue when I tried to wriggle out from under his sudden limp weight. Desperately I tried to get up and after the fat guy. By the time I made it he was gone. A slammed alley door. The roar of a powerful motor. Silence. I walked back to Drake, sprawled face down. If the fat stranger had painted a bull's eye on Drake's back he couldn't have done it neater. The guy had used a silencer, otherwise somebody would be investigating the sound of the shot. A quick search of Drake's pockets turned up nothing. Perhaps I could hide the body. An empty packing case was handy so I got Drake under the armpits and hoisted him over the edge. I threw some old newspapers in on top of him. His gun, a blued .38, I picked up gingerly with my handkerchief and dropped in after him. A gun I needed. But not that bad. Catch a paroled convict with a gun and it's all off. I didn't want to make it too easy for Hayes. There weren't half a dozen people who knew the Altman had been a sort of hideout for me, in the old days. Working nights on the paper, it had given me a chance to hang around town when I wanted, instead of going to the bungalow my dad had left me out in the Los Feliz Hills. I went up to the room I had taken, my knees shaking. I was trying to decide what to do next when the phone rang. For a moment I hesitated, my hand above the receiver. I picked the phone up and said, "Hello." A nice warm voice said, "Danny. Danny darling." Hayes had told me to stay away from Catherine. "Could you stay away from breathing? How did you know I was here?" The voice was the same as always, low and a little tremble, as if she couldn't hold herself in for the love of you, or for the love of any guy for that matter. Catherine said, ignoring my question, "I've got to see you, Danny. Right away. Please. I'm at the Malibu house." In spite of all she had done, I could have climbed right into the phone to get close to her. Then I backed off. It might as well be now, I told myself. I had a lot of questions to ask. Memories. It was her house at Malibu and we had lived there that one sad year of our marriage. "I'll come," I told her, "but make sure that lovely brother of yours isn't around. He doesn't know I'm calling you." "Really?" I left the hotel by the alley door. I didn't want to give the clerk another look at me. Outside I plowed through drifting fog that put red and green halos around the neon signs. I turned to look at the pile of dirty brick that was the Altmont. I shivered, but not from the damp night air. Someone had wanted me out of town, $5,000 worth. A fat guy with wavy hair and horn-rimmed glasses. Now he wouldn't have to pay. It could be done neatly with a murder rap. The clerk could prove I was at the hotel the same time the medical examiner would say Bert Drake had died. That was all Hayes would need. There was, I decided, no time to work this out at my leisure as I had planned. No, it had to be done, fast. Reg Dermott had wired me $200 advance when I got my release from San Quentin. I used a good chunk of it for cab fare to Malibu. We passed the Santa Monica Pier and I thought of the times I used to come down there to fish with my old man when I was a kid. I wonder what he would have said if he knew I might kill my ex-wife this night. He had never liked Catherine. Decoration, that's all she was, he used to say. We had some bitter arguments over that before I woke up in San Quentin one day and realized there might have been some truth in what he had said. At the extreme north end of the Malibu colony, the cab dropped me at a pile of glass and redwood that hung out over the dark and restless sea on pilings. She was waiting for me by the massive plate glass windows that gave you a view of Catalina Island on a clear day. You could hear the surf washing back and forth beneath the house. "Danny." That voice again. She stood in front of me, her sleek blonde head thrown back, lifting her arms to me so that the sleeves of her loose-fitting black dress fell above her elbows. "How did you know you could find me at the Altmont?" I asked harshly, ignoring her arms. "I was your wife, darling. Why wouldn't I know all your secrets?" With her cool fingers on my wrist, she led me to a davenport that curved expansively before a fieldstone fireplace. "There are some things I want to know." She pressed herself against me, cutting off my words with her mouth. For a moment I remembered that she had once been my wife. I shoved her aside. "Has your brother called about me?" I glanced into the shadows as if expecting him to jump out at me. "We've hardly spoken since everything happened." "He was best man at your wedding," I reminded her. "That marriage was all his idea," she said. "He never liked it that I married you." I gave a harsh laugh. "Hayes thought you should have a marriage of quality. He's a fine one to talk about quality." She got up and mixed a drink, and handed me a glass. "To us," she said, watching me over the rim of her glass. "To the three of us," I countered with a tight smile. "You and me and your husband. A Mexican divorce is quick and final, Danny. Then you and I could be remarried." What kind of a pitch was she giving me? I took her glass and gave her mine. "Somebody slipped me knockout drops the night the 32 grand was stolen. I'm not going to be sucker enough to walk into it again." Her violet eyes narrowed a little. "You think I did it?" I showed her my teeth. "That's what I figured to find out, sweetheart." The liquor warmed me. Remember, it was my first drink in nearly 4 years. On the piano was a photo of a smiling young guy wearing a polo helmet. He had a spoiled, pretty face. His eyes said he could be very nasty. I nodded at the framed photo. Your husband? She nodded her blonde head. Ty Dillard, she said bitterly. Fine old family and fine old Stony Brook. Only one thing Catherine loved better than Catherine, and that was money. Watching emotion play across her hard little face, I said, You got me out here only to tell me your husband is broke? She took my hands in hers and twisted around on the big davenport so that her black dress hiked up around her thighs. She pretended not to notice. I know a place in Mexico, she said. A few miles from Mexico City. We could go there until things quiet down. One thing I'll say for you, Catherine. You come right to the point. I yanked her dress down over her knees. What happened to the $32,000 that night, Catherine? Her mouth smiled. You don't have to pretend with me, Danny. There's just the two of us together now. I know you've got it hidden someplace. I seized her wrists. Who got the money? I shouted. When she didn't answer, I lifted my hands to her white throat. She drew back from me, fright streaking across her violet eyes. Those nights alone I had dreamed of this moment. You have plenty of time to think when the Frisco fog rolls into your cell block, and you know it's the same fog that settles around the top of the mark and around the other bright spots where people are laughing. And you're put away from the laughter all because of a woman. It begins to grow on you, the germ of murder, until one day you accept it as casually as you accept the fact of a nose and the ability to smell a spring day. Dirty fingers reached for her again, and suddenly the idea was dead and cold in me. She shrank back from me. I felt a draft on my ankles and turned, the skin pricking at the back of my neck. If I hadn't seen his photo on the piano, I might not have recognized Ty Dillard in the flesh. There was no polo helmet on his head this night. He wore an expensive tweed jacket and wrinkled flannel slacks. His spoiled face was tight with jealous anger. He gestured at my cheek with the barrel of a snub-nosed .38. My wife's lipstick always looks good on other men. The silence was sudden, with only the wash of ocean beneath the house. In that instant I saw Catherine's face. Her lips had paled, but there was a sort of wild expectancy in her violet eyes. Dillard said, Get out of here, Catherine. Back to town. She didn't argue or plead, or even look at me who was being left behind for the slaughter. She grabbed her wrap off the davenport and ran outside. In a moment I heard her car move off toward the highway. Somewhere in the back of my mind I remembered that Dillard had once been an all-American guard. He still looked as if he could move around with any guy's his own weight, which was about 40 pounds more than I carried. I had nothing against the guy and was sorry the thing had gotten this far. I was principally sorry for myself, because I could see I was either going to get shot or have the tar beaten out of me. He laid the gun on the piano and shed his jacket. He staggered a little. He was more than a little drunk. This was a bad situation. If I was lucky enough to fix Dillard's clock, all he had to do was get in touch with Hayes. The mere fact that I was in a house belonging to my ex-wife would probably violate my parole. On top of that, there was still Bert Drake wedged into that packing case in the basement of the Hotel Altmont. For my first night back in town, I was working myself into a beautiful spot from all angles. He came at me, flexing his biceps, hammering his fists solidly into his palms as if to give me a sample of what to expect. He lifted his hands and set his feet. Everything I had went into my first punch. It caught him in the eye. I felt the shock to my heels. He only grinned at me. I'm glad you're going to make a fight of it, he said nastily. Don't get the idea I'm doing this because of Catherine. But I have pride. When I found out my wife was entertaining a rat like Danny Gumbo, it was too much. Who told you I was here? Anonymous phone call to my club. It seems that everybody in town hates you plenty. Everybody but Catherine. I started backing up. It's a plant, you fool. Don't you see? Catherine got me out here deliberately. The sentence died. I thought he'd kicked me in the face. Groggy, I tried to fight him off, retreating. He slammed me across the face. The French doors, leading to the porch, flew open behind me as I hit them solidly with my shoulders. Before I could duck, he was after me. He wrestled me off my feet. I stumbled backwards, the low porch railing hitting me at the knees. I flipped in the air once, then dropped straight down into that boiling surf. Just before I hit the water, I looked up. He stood grinning at me. He was, I was sure, hoping I would drown. Chapter 3. While dropping, I must have shouted my fear because my throat muscles contracted, but no sound came. All I could hear was the booming surf in my ears. Then I hit the cold water. The moment I went under, my head cleared. A roller caught me and sent me flat against a piling. It jarred the breath out of me. Desperately I tried to find a toehold in the sand, but the sloppy surf dragged me back. Again I went under in that black and salty death. Then I was conscious of a voice beating at me above the roar of the breakers, a woman's voice. "Keep floating, Gumbo. I'm coming." Her voice calmed me. I felt her take me by the wrist and begin towing me through the dark water. It was slow and painful work, for my clothes weighted me down, but nevertheless I had sense enough to help her along by paddling with my free hand and kicking my feet. We got to the beach and I sank down, gasping for breath. My rescuer was tall and leggy in a two-piece bathing suit. Even then I wondered why she would be dressed for swimming at that hour. She went to a little mound of clothes on the sand and slipped into a sweater and skirt and sandals. That, I decided, had been no bathing suit after all. She seemed slightly embarrassed when she led me to a small coupe. I glanced back at the house. No lights showed. Cold fury beat at me as I thought of Dillard leaving me to drown. Someday, I vowed, we would settle that score. Now that I had a chance to see her by dashlight, I got a shock. It wasn't a pretty face, but interesting. Her brows arched to a fine line above eyes that had a lot of green in their gray. Her nose, after I had digested all the features, was familiar. "I saw you on Main Street tonight," I told her. "You were standing in front of a bar. Don't tell me business is so bad you'd follow me to Malibu just to fish me out of the surf." "You're not very smart," she said, "for an old newspaper man." By the time she drove me back to LA, I was shivering in my wet clothes. My face ached. Her apartment was small, just a kitchenette and pull-down bed and bath. She went into a small dressing room and returned in a few minutes wearing a red flannel robe. Her long coppery hair was still damp, but it was beginning to curl around her shoulders. Her toenails, painted crimson, winked at me from a pair of sandals. She tossed me a blanket and told me to get out of my wet clothes. "And don't think," she said, blushing, "that this means anything. Between you and me." She went into the kitchen to make coffee. I got out of my clothes and under the blanket. "You told me I'm an old newspaper man and not very smart. Now what?" She came to stand in the kitchen doorway. "I thought you'd remember me by this time. The name is Lori. Lori Clark." I snapped my fingers as memory suddenly roared back on me. Sure, 4, maybe 5 years ago. A sorority kid who did campus stuff for the paper. I remembered helping her rewrite it and helping her to unlearn college journalism. It made her hang around me out of gratitude, I suppose. But I had brushed her off. Catherine had claimed my thoughts in those days. In these days, too, only in a different way. I was 30 years old, and right then I felt like her grandfather. I asked her why she followed me. "Reg said to keep an eye on you. That's what I was doing on Main Street. I waited until Hayes and his boys had left, then I tried to intercept you." She blushed again. "You misinterpreted my motives." "Yeah, I sure did. I just happened to see you get in a cab when you came out of the Altamont by the alley door. I followed you to Malibu. When I saw you and Dillard fighting, I tried to get in the side door, but it was locked. When he knocked you into the water, I was afraid you'd drown." I gave her a weak smile. "You weren't the only one who was afraid." I sipped my coffee. "You were nice to me once," she said, lighting a cigarette. "I haven't forgotten." She gave me the cigarette and went into the dressing room. In a few minutes she emerged with her hair brushed and tied with a green ribbon. She wore a gray suit and sheer dark nylons and a pair of patent leather shoes. "I'm going to a hotel," she told me. "Nobody will think of looking for you in my apartment." That night I dreamed Bert Drake came swimming toward me out of the dark Pacific. Bubbles rose from a hole in his back. I came awake with the phone ringing. For a moment I couldn't remember where I was. I switched on a lamp and sat staring at the phone. When I lifted the phone, a shrill feminine voice said, "Miss Lori Clark, please." "I'll take a message. Regarding her wire to a Mr. Paulie Dorgan, there is no one by that name at the address she gave. Would she have another?" My face tightened. "I don't know, but I'll sure ask her." I put the phone back on the cradle and looked at myself in the wall mirror. I looked hard around the eyes. A lot of people, including a gal named Lori Clark, were giving me a very bad time. The next morning a tailor pressed the last dampness out of my clothes. My mouth tasted like a piece of dried kelp. The morning papers, I saw, carried no page one story about a hoodlum named Bert Drake found in a packing box in the basement of the Altamont Hotel. At the Globe office, typewriters stilled when I came into the city room. Several of the old-timers gave me a nod. The newcomers just stared. There was a sort of embarrassed silence. Most of those in the big room believed the stories about me and avoided my eyes. Lori, still wearing her gray suit, gave me a friendly smile across a desktop. I went into Reg's office. I was never so glad to see anything in my life as his axe blade face and gray crew haircut. Maybe he didn't see the hand I stuck out at him. I don't know. Something died in me, hard. I stood there a moment while the anger built in me. You got me out of prison and I'm grateful. But if that's how you feel toward me, what for? His eyes glared at me. Save the thanks. I should have left you up there. Your first night back and you get mixed up with Catherine. You fool. Lori, I realized, had told him about the night before. I put my hands flat on his desktop, right on a pile of copy paper. You can take this job, Reg, and you know what you can do with it. My voice trailed off. I was staring at the top story all ready for Reg's pencil to mark it up for the composing room. The lead paragraph caught my eye. The body of a man tentatively identified as Burt Drake was found by rubbish collectors in the basement of the Altamont Hotel. Reg caught me looking at the story and I prayed he couldn't see the shock in my eyes. He said, "You remember Burt Drake? A 2-bit hood. Used to run around with Polly Dorgan." "Yeah," I said dryly, "I remember both of them." I took a deep breath. "What goes with Polly Dorgan these days, Reg?" "He was gone for a long time. But I understand he's back hanging around the gym. I'd like to have a talk with him, about a lot of things." Reg said, "You won't get much out of him. Polly is walking on his heels. Took too many punches in the head, I guess. So far, the cops didn't know who killed Burt Drake. Otherwise, Hayes would be looking me up at the Globe office. 3 people had known I was at the Altamont at the time of the murder, the clerk, Catherine and the killer. And there was Lori. She was outside the hotel while Drake was getting himself killed in the basement. Reg put me on the society page, which is some switch from doing a sports column. I decided to lay it on the line with Lori, so asked if I could buy some dinner. She suggested her apartment, which was all right with me. That evening when she was frying the lamb chops, I said casually, "What's the angle, Lori? What ties you into all this?" She wore a green apron over her blouse and skirt. She turned to me and I thought her lips W6NT a little pale. "You're even suspicious of me?" She stared at me. "After I saved your life and everything?" "I'm grateful. But there's more to it than gratitude." "Such as?" "You've been trying to send a wire to Polly Dorgan. Remember good old Polly? He was one of the boys fighting for me that night at the charity bout. Are you trying to insinuate I had a hand in stealing that money?" The lamb chops began to burn. "I don't know what to think. Has Reg Dermott put you on a feature story about me and my shady past, or have you got another reason for digging up a walking corpse like Polly Dorgan?" She walked to the door and opened it and stood there glaring at me. It was an obvious invitation to leave. I took it. As I walked past her, I said, "Any of the boys on the sports desk could have told you that Polly Dorgan has started hanging around the gym again." The door slammed behind me. Quickly I went down the hall, then cut toward an open window. I climbed out on a fire escape I had spotted that morning. I could see her through her window, go to the phone. She picked up the phone, frowning. Then she put it down. She took off her apron and stepped out into the hall. I was disappointed. I thought I might be able to eavesdrop a little. In the basement, the noise of the big hot water heater covered my footsteps. I saw her unlock a small door leading to a storage bin. Trunk hinges groaned. In a moment she found what she was looking for. She closed the trunk. She had an object stuck under her arm when she stepped out of the storage bin. When she turned and saw me there, her face went dead white. It was a dusty black leather bag I snatched from under her arm. On one side, in gold letters, was stamped, "The Gym." The last time I had seen that bag it had held $32,000 of charity money. Chapter 4. For a moment she stood pressed back against the stack of trunks, her bosom, under the tight jersey blouse, stilled as she held her breath. "All right," I said, trying to keep the cold fury out of my voice, "let's hear you explain." She sighed and looked away for a moment. Then she said, "Polly Dorgan was my brother's best friend. We played together when we were kids. Polly was older. Sort of a first love," I said sarcastically. She shook her red head at me. "Reg can tell you how it was with Polly. He's crazy now. Since my brother died and Polly's been sick, I've tried to look after him. Polly disappeared right after you were sent up. I decided now that you were back I'd better get in touch with him. I knew you were going to find out who the real thief was." "Go on." "You see, If you ever prove you didn't steal that money, I'm afraid they'll railroad Polly. Once when he was a kid he was arrested for robbery. I gave her a crooked smile. Thanks, Lori. Thanks a lot. She ran after me when I started up the stairs, clutching at my arm. Polly didn't do it. I flung her aside and went out into the street. Back at the office I had just stowed the bag in a big desk drawer when I raised up to find Hayes standing there. He stared at me out of his rusty brown eyes. For a minute I thought he'd come to arrest me for killing Bert Drake. I began to get panicky. Just when all the pieces were beginning to fit. I looked around for some way to make a break for it. Hayes touched my bruised cheek. I saw Ty Dillard today. He got a black eye out of it. He was pretty drunk. I asked him how he got the shiner and he started cussing you. Catherine was with him and she made him shut up. Otherwise I might have found out that you were in Malibu last night seeing my sister. My heart beat wildly with relief at not being picked up for that Bert Drake thing. You can't prove it, Hayes, I told him. He put his big hands flat on the desktop. If you do anything, he said under his breath, to break up Catherine's marriage, you'll wish you'd been dead for a long time. I felt cold inside as I always did when facing him. Without another word he wheeled out of the office, big and tough and full of murder. In an all-night coffee shop, I was waiting for scrambled eggs when I happened to look through the front window toward the street where 3 cars were waiting for the light to change. One of the cars was a cad. In the light from the coffee shop window I could see the guy at the wheel, a fat man with thick wavy hair and horn-rimmed glasses. Something began to buzz around in my head. I rushed for the door, the fry cook yelling that my eggs were done. Outside, the light changed. The cad shot across the street. I had one of my few breaks. A cruising cab was just turning the corner. I hailed it. I yelled at the driver to follow the cad tail lights on the hill ahead of us. He made the top of Fort Hill, which had been the first aristocratic district back in pioneer days. In the crosspatch of narrow streets we lost the cad. The fat guy, I was sure, had gone into one of the apartment houses. We cruised around, but no luck. We were at the end of a dead-end street when I saw the sign, Hayes Street. Sure, now I remembered. I stared at a row of new swank apartment houses. Up here was the site of the old Hayes mansion on Hayes Street. It was named after Hayes's great-grandfather who had come west with a burro loaded down with tin pans. Up here on the old hilltop was where a park was supposed to be. The ground had been broken for the project just before I went away to San Quentin. It was to be a memorial to the vanishing section of the old town, with the first high school and a few mansions so tourists could get an idea of what the city had looked like in the early days. But instead of a park there were nice shiny apartment houses with such fancy names as Vista Del Mar, The Crystal, Hermitage. It made me lose some of my tension to realize that the fat guy was flesh and blood. I had been starting to think that perhaps it was an apparition standing behind Bert Drake down in the Altamont basement and firing a bullet into his back. The next morning I climbed an old stairway to a big familiar room that still smelled of sweat and old leather. Memories came crowding back. Once I had been welcome at the gym. Foster, a little bald guy with a mustache, saw me first. The news must have spread fast because the big room stilled. A pair of fighters in the ring turned to look at me. Out of the corner of his mouth, Foster said, "You played it right down the line, real smart." I would like to have explained how things were, but I had to move fast. Before another sunrise they would have me tied in with Bert Drake. He took a dollar bill out of his pocket, crumpled it and threw it into a spit bucket. "Now," he said, "you've got $32,001. I felt color mount to my face. I heard a shuffling step beside me. A fat man with a ring-marked face reached for the bill in the pail. He wiped it off on the leg of his dirty trousers and shoved it into his pocket. He started away, walking with a peculiar up and down motion. "Polly," I said softly. "Polly Dorgan." His eyes, I saw, as he turned, looked right through me. "Buy you a drink." "Polly," I said, a little sick at my stomach. I had hoped that maybe Reg Dermott had been wrong about him. Foster said, from the fringe of watching pugs, "Leave Polly alone. Drinking ain't for him." "Coffee, then, Polly," I urged, my voice tight in my throat as I saw the angry faces around me. One word from Foster and they'd kick me downstairs. Polly fell in step beside me. At the bottom of the stairs, I saw Foster still watching. A lot of people, it seemed to me suddenly, were wishing I'd drop dead. Polly and I drank our coffee in a Spring Street hash house. I couldn't help but remember the shrewd, tough fighter of 4 years ago. Something had taken the brain out of him. Fat and stupid, he was now, with his brown hair clipped right down tight against his scalp. Probably to save haircuts. I felt ill at ease not knowing how to start. Had any good fights lately? Going fight next week. Pedro. He jerked a hand toward San Pedro. I got to get me the light heavy belt before I hang up my gloves. Paulie had always been one to take 5 punches to get in one of his own a fast route to cerebral palsy. Yet it didn't seem possible that a man could get this bad in these few years. What happened that night, Paulie? I said sharply. He spilled some coffee on the front of his dirty shirt. Sailor Anson come at me and I went for his basket. He began weaving about on the chair, ducking imaginary punches. I laid a hand on his arm. I mean the night the $32,000 was stolen. I had gone to the box office and picked up the money. One of those armored trucks was coming by to take it to the bank. But I was drunk and I took the money to the dressing room. You were there, Paulie, and I had another drink. Then you left and Catherine came in. That's the last thing I remember. When I woke up, the money was gone. Slur Anson hit me right on the button. I never could catch him. He was on his bicycle. When he started to rise, I said, they never found the money bag. But I know where it is. Remember a girl named Lori? You and her brother were friends. What about her, Paulie? Why would she have that money bag? He had some difficulty extracting his feet from around the chair legs. You come and watch me train, huh, boy? I followed him out onto Spring Street. He took me by the arm and led me back to the gym, mumbling about the fight he was going to have. In front of the gym was a yellow convertible. Even though the top was up, I instinctively knew who was behind the wheel. I let Paulie go on upstairs. Danny. It was Catherine's voice. Today she wore a red dress with a white collar. Her blonde hair curled nicely around her small head. $100 alligator bag lay on the seat. Her nylon-clad legs looked good. You were a little coward, I told her viciously, or you wouldn't have run out on me the other night. I went for help, Danny. Believe me. When I came back, the house was dark. I was so afraid he'd kill you. Not a bad story. She gripped the wheel tautly with her white-gloved hands. Danny, if you still have that money, let's go away together. I'm sick of this. I gave her a hard smile. How mercenary can you get? She eyed me critically. You have got the money, haven't you? Without bothering to answer, I turned on my heel and walked off. Behind me I heard the clash of gears. How, I asked myself, had I ever thought I loved her? But more important, how had she known that I'd be around the gym? She didn't park there just out of sheer coincidence. Catherine, I recalled bitterly, had a morbid interest in prize fighters. Once I had even suspected she was fascinated by one Paulie Dorgan. But surely not now, not a fat hulk with a shaved head and no brain. It was a blind alley wherever I turned. Everything led back to the fat guy with the wavy hair and horn-rimmed glasses. I tried to think of everyone I had ever known who might answer his description. He fit in exactly nowhere. Then I got to thinking about Fort Hill and Hayes Street and the new apartment houses where a park was supposed to be. After a shave and breakfast, I left the crummy hotel where I was parking and presented myself at the city clerk's office. I found the book that contained maps and tax lists of Fort Hill. Out of the corner of my eye, as I flipped through the pages, I noticed the clerk giving me a peculiar look. But I was so keyed up at the knowledge that at last I might be on the right track that it didn't register. In that list of property owners, one name leapt out at me. My hands began to shake. I was staring at the open page when the clerk said, jerking up his head from a newspaper. You're Gumbo. There it was on the front page, my mug picture. Beside it was a photo of the late Burt Drake. And the headline, Paroled Reporter Sought in Killing. The clerk was already yelling for help. Faces swung my way. A uniformed cop started through the big lobby doors toward me, dragging at his gun. A frightened woman began screaming as I dashed for the back door. The noise followed me. You have to know your city to make a break like that in broad daylight. I hit the alleys. Behind me a police whistle shrilled. Chapter 5. 3 blocks away I got a cab and headed south. From a liquor store phone booth I called Reg Dermott. Meet me at Laurie's place, I told him, unable to think of a better locale for a showdown. Listen, Danny, his voice came at me over the phone, every cop in town is hot on your tail. I said coldly, you'd better meet me. Reg. I mean it. His voice changed. Are you telling me what to do? There no longer was any use of pretense. I let him have it. I looked up some things in the tax office today. There are some interesting angles on the Fort Hill Park deal. Want me to explain over the phone? A little tiredly, he said, I can't make it before night. Keep out of sight until then. As I began walking aimlessly, the full panic came down on me. Hayes had what he wanted. They suspected me of murdering Burt Drake. As an ex-convict, they could gun me down and a coroner's jury would not ask too many questions. Keeping to side streets, I started back toward town. I drank beer. I killed some of the day in bowling alleys. Every time I saw a cop, I froze. It got dark. By the time I got to Laurie's neighborhood, I was sweating. I didn't think Reg would turn me in, but under the circumstances I couldn't be sure. All I had so far to go on was supposition. Laurie drove up in her coupe. Nobody that I could see was tailing her. I followed her inside. Reg said he'll be along shortly, she said, taking her keys from a brown bag. Then she laid a hand on my arm and her mouth began to jerk. Did you do it? No, I didn't kill Burt Drake. When I said that, she relaxed. We stepped into her apartment, right into a shambles. A frightened cry burst from her throat at sight of the wreckage. I yanked her roughly back and dived into the apartment. No one was there. The bed was down, the floor covered with sheets and blankets. A scrabble of lacy things from emptied drawers lay on the dressing room floor. I stuck your chin out, baby, I said, suddenly feeling very sorry for her. She swayed against me and I felt her coppery hair against my cheek. Then she pulled away and shed her belted brown coat. She rolled up the sleeves of her dress and we went to work straightening up the mess. There were 100 questions I wanted to ask. Among them, had Hayes been to the office looking for me? But I held off. She was shaken, make no mistake about that. I don't understand all this, she said weakly. By the time Reg arrived, we still had a lot to do. Somebody was looking for something, I told him in answer to his surprised question. He came into the room, a wiry little man in a tweed suit. He threw his hat on the sofa and sat down. You could have played square with me about Burt Drake and what happened at the Altmont, Reg said accusingly. This grows on you. Reg. The more you dig in. This time it's murder. That makes it different. No longer is it just a case of swiping dough that cheats some kids out of a clubhouse. A man is dead, a hoodlum, sure, but they can still kill you for it. I said, watching his face, first I find out that Catherine thinks I've still got the money. Then I get rescued from Catherine's husband by Laurie. It turns out that Laurie used to know Polly Dorgan. Then I find that she's been keeping the bag that held the 32 grand. She says she owes Dorgan a debt or something because he was her brother's best friend. About the bag, said Reg. I knew she had it. She found it in the alley outside the arena the night of the big steal. I had her covering the doings from the woman's angle. When the money turns up missing, Laurie does some prowling before the cops get to it. I told her to hang on to the bag in the hope it might have prints, because I knew Hayes would destroy any evidence he could in order to send you up. He never forgave you for marrying his sister, marrying into that pioneer. Reg said it like a curse, family of his. He sighed. But the bag held no prints, at all. I whirled a chair around and straddled it. I'm in this. Reg, up to my protruding ears. Somebody sent Drake to pay me $5 grand to blow town, somebody who had a nice setup here and somehow figured with me coming back from San Quentin it stood a chance of getting tipped over. When I jumped Drake, this guy behind it all, pulls a gun. I described the fat guy with the wavy hair and the horn-rimmed glasses. Reg said he didn't know him. Maybe the whole thing could have been cleared up 4 years ago, Reg said, if you hadn't been such a fool. Before any of us could help you, the DA had got a guilty plea out of you. I lowered my head. I thought it was Catherine who had taken that money. I was so crazy in love with her, I couldn't think. All I wanted to do was protect her. Something scraped along the roof over our heads. Somebody or something was moving up there. It came again, a dragging sound. Probably a cat, Laurie said nervously. They're thick in this neighborhood. I was too keyed up to worry about cats. Had I shown a little more interest, we could have cleaned the whole thing up then and there. And now we come to you, I said to Reg. He stiffened. Before you jump me, you'd better stop and think that I had a tough time wrangling you a parole when the loot was still thought to be in your possession. I had to go pretty high to get that for you. I still don't know why you did it. Reg. I'd like to believe it was out of friendship. But something else ties in, the Fort Hill Park. Reg said, go on, Danny. The city was supposed to have Fort Hill as a park. Ward Wheelock was councilman for that district 4 years ago.
You knew him and so do I, a fat, pompous politician who hung around the gyms and bought a box seat by the year at the arena.
Lori said, "You're not accusing Reg. I've got a hunch that maybe Wheelock swung enough votes in the city council to turn the property back so somebody could buy it up for the price of thumbtacks. It's valuable property. Reg. But that would take money for a quick bribe. Maybe the opportunity was too good to pass up. $32,000 in cash might do it. Maybe Wheelock took the money and fixed it so property could be purchased from the city on closed bids." Reg looked angry. "And now you look up the tax records and find I own property on Fort Hill. Is that what you're driving at?" When I nodded, he said, "My old man left me that property 20 years ago. Look it up if you want." I wanted to believe him. I hope that's the truth. Reg, because I'm going to get the truth out of Wheelock. For the first time I've really got my teeth into something. Reg looked up at me gravely. "Wheelock's been dead for a year. Heart attack." That rocked me back on my heels. Before I could open my mouth I heard a whirring sound at the door. I had worked a police beat on the paper too long not to know what that sound was. Somebody was boring a peephole in the door. A puff of sawdust drifted floorward. My throat tightened. "Thanks, Reg," I said under my breath. "Thanks a lot for bringing Hayes." For it was now Hayes's bull voice in the hall. He had seen me through the peephole. Hayes's shoulder smashed against the door. I turned wildly for the window. Reg cried, "If you try and break for it, Hayes can kill you." The door crashed in. Hayes, momentarily off balance, plowed into the room. One quick glance at the hall showed it was empty. Hayes, then, was alone. Bent over like that, he took the full smash of my fist against his jaw. He fell to his knees. I kicked his gun aside, and he stared at me stupidly out of his rusty red eyes. Then I was racing for the hallway. I remembered Lori's hands tight against her lips. I couldn't tell whether she was frightened for me or someone else. Hayes might have men downstairs for all I knew. I swung myself over the ledge of the hall window to the fire escape. I scrambled up the ladder to the roof, as I heard Hayes roaring from the apartment below, trying to get to the phone. I had not taken 3 steps across the tarred roof in the moon-swept darkness when I saw the huddled shape of a man in a dark suit. Dinner clothes. A streak of red across his white shirt. His hands opened and closed spasmodically. It was Ty Dillard, Catherine's current husband, who had made that scraping sound on the roof, trying to crawl in his agony. That sound had been made by no cat, it had been made by a dying man. Chapter 6. No one else was on the roof. I dropped beside Dillard. The area of the roof where he lay was wet and sticky. He had lost a lot of blood. Downstairs I could hear Hayes yelling into a phone. Cop cars would be converging on this apartment house in a matter of minutes. Dillard clutched my arm. "I followed him here," he said thickly in his halting speech. He went through the girl's apartment. He came up here to escape when you came up the stairs. He saw me when I followed him. He took a knife." "Who was it?" I demanded hoarsely, expecting Hayes to pop over the roof edge any second. He looked at me for a moment. His lips made fluttering movements. "Fort Hill," he gasped. "The crystal." He sighed and fell back. There was no pulse. In the distance as I huddled there, came the thin wail of a siren. From the opposite direction another siren joined the first. I cleared the jump to the next apartment building at full tilt. I raced down the back stairs and along a service alley just as brakes squealed in front of Lori's apartment house. I ran as I had never run before. Weak and shaken I ducked black and whites for 2 blocks, then started walking. You can talk all you want about a criminal evading capture, but sooner or later some bright rookie with his eye on a sergeant's stripes who has a memory for faces, will get you. 2 cabs later, I paid off my driver at the edge of Fort Hill. "The Crystal," Dillard had said. I had seen the place on my last tour up here. There were no familiar names on the letter boxes at the Crystal, so I punched the manager's buzzer and hoped I would not run into the lethal end of a gun. Murder had been done twice, Burt Drake and now Ty Dillard. I wondered how Catherine would look in mourning. A gray-haired woman opened the door. "I scraped the paint off the fender of a cab this morning, driven by a short plump man with bushy hair and wearing horn-rimmed glasses," I told her. "I want to pay for any damage." I gave her one of Reg Dermot's cards. She looked at the card. "You must mean Mr. Mills. He owns the building. He lives in the penthouse, but I don't believe he's home. Maybe he'll have a servant I can talk to. He lives alone." That's what I was hoping to hear. I thanked her and told her to have Mills give me a call. I went outside, then ducked to the rear entrance. I climbed the stairs to the roof on the 5th floor. Up there was a California bungalow set right down amidst palms and shrubbery like it belonged in the suburbs. Plenty of redwood furniture. Below, the lights of the city spread out all the way to Long Beach. A window was open. I climbed in and switched on a lamp. The bungalow was expensively furnished in bamboo. There was nobody around. With my heart banging in my ears, I prowled into a room that had been fixed up like a gymnasium with weights and a heavy and light punching bag. In the bathroom in the medicine chest, I saw a bottle of brown liquid and I knew I was finally on the right track. I unscrewed the top and got a whiff of the contents. From behind me, a voice said, "That was very smart. The part about scraping paint off my fender." My throat went tight. I held up the bottle. "Spirit gum," I said, turning, but seeing nothing in the shadows. "You were pretty clever at that. I would never have recognized you that night in the basement when you killed Drake by mistake. Shut up and don't move. I've got a gun on you." I could hear him dialing the phone. I edged forward. "You always were a smart one. Was this apartment house your cut of the deal? Councilman Wheelock liked your kind. You stole the 30 grand and paid Wheelock his fancy bribe and got in on this deal." I jumped then, the minute he turned his back to speak into the phone. We wrestled across the grass-carpeted floor, knocking over chairs. With one free hand, I tore at his toupee. In spite of the spirit gum holding it to his scalp, my hand came away with a chunk hair. His head, round like the end of a bullet with its clipped hair, shone with sweat. Paulie Dorgan's eyes didn't have that far-away stupid look now. As we broke apart, he shot me. The bullet was in me someplace, that much I knew. But I could feel nothing. I sat on the floor, feeling silly and wanting to laugh because there was no pain. I said, "A nice trick hanging around the gym, leading a double life. When you found out Lori had that money bag, you ransacked her place. Dillard knew you'd been hanging around Catherine. He was jealous. He followed you to Lori's place. When he cornered you on the roof, you stuck a knife in him." Holding the phone with one hand, the gun with the other, Dorgan dialed again. This time he said, "I've got him." He evidently thought I had no chance, bleeding like I was. I yanked one end of the grass rug when he paused to light a cigarette. His feet shot out from under him. He came down hard on his head. I crawled across the room and picked up the gun he had dropped. Dorgan lay there, moaning softly. I said, "You had to keep up the disguise as long as I was alive. Or up for murder where they'd put me in the gas house. You knew I'd find out the truth eventually with Reg's help. When I got out of San Quentin, you got panicky and started hanging around Foster's gym again, the old Paulie Dorgan. You hired Bert Drake to scare me out of town with the 5 grand. He lifted his head to stare at me. He put his hands under him to give himself leverage. I hit him between the eyes with the gun. He sank back to the floor. How long it was until Catherine came, I have no idea. But there she was standing in the doorway, her eyes wild. "There's your lover boy," I told her, waving the gun at Dorgan. She gave a little cry. She ran across the room in her bright red dress, showing me an edge of lacy petticoat. She dropped to her knees beside him. "Get off your knees," I told her. "You'll get holes in your nylons." She stared at me out of her violet eyes. When I tried to give her a cold smile, it seemed that my face was falling apart. "You and he were in it from the beginning. When he couldn't scare me out of town, you got me out to Malibu and phoned your husband at the same time. You thought Dillard would either kill me or I'd kill him. Either way you'd be rid of a husband. You wanted Paulie Dorgan. You wanted him all along, even when I was married to you. You precious tramp." She was still on her hands and knees and now her tears dripped down on Dorgan's crumpled form. The sight of them together like that sickened me. As long as I was alive, I told her, Paulie had to play it safe. She tried to smile through her tears at me. "Listen, Danny. I've been a tramp. You're right. But I can change. I'll be good to you." She started crawling toward me and I could see beyond her wet eyes into her scheming brain. "Get away, Catherine," I cried. "You'd like to get your hands on this gun. Then you could fix me once and for all." But that didn't stop her. My nerves began to scream and I could feel sweat on my face. She came closer. I didn't want to kill her. I felt my senses slipping away. I wouldn't be able to do anything about Catherine, I knew that now. Just sit there and let her put a bullet in my head. I fell back, the wall catching me at the shoulders. I was slumped like that when Hayes stepped into the room and said, "Don't touch that gun, Catherine." I could tell by his face that he had been standing out there taking it all in. How he got here I don't know. Followed Catherine, perhaps. One side of his face was skinned where I had hit him. He held a snub-nosed .38 in his hand. This was it. Curtains. I've tried to protect the honor of my family, he said, his rusty red eyes a little wild. It doesn't mean much these days, but it means something to me. I knew you had a hand in taking that money, Catherine. I knew it all along. And I sent Gumbo up for it. From the floor Catherine began to whimper. You're a policeman. You can kill him. Everything will be over. Hayes stood there, holding his gun, his head cocked as Polly Dorgan began to groan. He said, I hope you never pull out of this, Gumbo, because you've brought nothing but misery to me and my sister. He stood staring at the blood on my shirt, as if undecided. Then his gun barrel lifted an inch. I held my breath, watching him through a haze. His finger tightened on the trigger and I tensed, wanting to scream but unable to utter a sound. All I could think of in that awful minute was Lori and how she had risked her neck in that treacherous surf to save me. 2 plainclothesmen entered the room, one from the front door, one from the window. The 2 young cops who had tailed me from Glendale that night 150 years ago. Hayes whirled at the sound they made. What are you doing here? He demanded. Blandly, one of them said, you assigned us to the case yourself. Lieutenant. Remember? For a moment Hayes glared at them. Then his heavy shoulders sagged. He put his gun and badge on the table before he walked out of the room. In the newspaper business you get used to things and take every assignment that comes along. But Reg didn't have me cover the trial and the subsequent convictions. He put me back on the sports desk. Those kids I told you about have their clubhouse. It opened last week. The end.